think about Utu, I reflect to when I was growing up, and in our community, when I was growing up, it was everyone was your parent. Like, it didn't matter what you did. As a mistake, the first adult who would see you would call you out on it. And to me, that's what Utu speaks to, that it's a shared responsibility of the community to just make sure that they're raising their kids right and just being together in that space as a community. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's working. So, my name is Michael Baruti. I'm a creative director to Bongo. So, I was reflecting the Imar's question, and one of the greatest poets who ever lived, who goes by the name of Rick Ross, he once said, "How many people you bless is how you measure success." So, and in this particular context, connecting it to Utu, for me, it's more like blessing people is more about giving opportunities to others, right? All of us are here because somebody either took a chance on us, or gave us an opportunity, and we have responsibility of doing the same for others. And with that comes the whole equation of trust, hardworking, responsibility, which also communal accountability, which also kind of relate to what, or interlinks with what Sami said. So for me, Utu is actually about that, in this particular context, giving each other opportunity, but also the one who are given opportunities to actually be responsible and be respectful of that, because they know it comes with responsibility. So yeah, for me at least.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cleena Ryan. I'm Director of Education and Research at Ubongo. So I think for me, for Utu, I was born and raised in Ireland. So the first time I heard the word Utu, I was an adult, I was already working. But the more I learned, I realized I'm lucky that I was raised with those values. And so for me, it came across in, why do we do the things we do? We talk sometimes about the difference between, charity and the civil society, and those are actually two different things. Do you help somebody to be seen as a good person, or because you think you will gain favor by doing that, or you think it's, going to get you favor with a higher power, or do you do it because actually we're all human beings and, we only win when everybody is winning? So for me, it's that sense of solidarity and that intrinsic motivation that we have a duty to each other, first and foremost as human beings, to do right by one another.
Habari za mchana. Yeah, so my name is Veronica and I work with Ubongo as a research and outreach officer. So for me, Utu, in reflecting like my childhood situation, it means respect and valuing each other. Respecting the sense of respecting others, respecting each other, respecting others' opinions and their perception, in just respect as when we grew up, but also valuing each other, taking turn in playing whatever we are doing. So that is Utu for me.
Okay, so there seems to be a common thread here of shared humanity, of a value system that gives meaning, of respect, right? So let's unpack that a little bit. This is CSO week. We've attended many sessions across the past 2 days, and something that keeps coming up is employment, right? And Tanzanians, when asked about, what do they care about the economy and employment and opportunities, right? But we are here talking about values instead of what is commonly talked about when it comes to employment, which is skills, really. So I guess, to my panelists, what role and what connection do things like values and Utu specifically have when it comes to economic progression and growth, right? And tying it back to that 2050 vision for Tanzania, and just like the growth and prosperity of Africa overall?
Yeah, so I think I can start on that. I think, I was really interested in the report shared by Teo Ueda yesterday, the Sautyawanshi. And I think what was so interesting to me about that was that a lot of the, themes that were coming out that people were valuing are actually also things that came out when we were researching Utu. And so, I remember it was back in, I'm going to say 2018, 2019, there was some research that showed, there's a skill mismatch between what employers are expecting and hoping the workforce to have and what they will need for these future roles that don't even exist yet, and what the kids that we spoke to thought that they would need. And so when we spoke to the kids, they told us they thought they would need things like, discipline, obedience, hard work. And when we spoke to employers, they said, things like creativity, cooperation, those more kind of soft skills, value-led things. So I think there is still a huge role for values to play when we talk about, the economy and economic prosperity. And I think that's going to really make the difference in kind of how Tanzania grows as a nation, right? Because we can think of those values as more individualistic, or we can think of them still as communal. It depends on what's the driving factor between them. So, for example, you can think of something like accountability as a one-way process where, I have to hold leaders accountable, but also it works both ways. I can also hold myself accountable for the good of the community. I can also hold my fellows accountable for the good. And I remember one thing that came out very strongly in the research we did, not just in Tanzania, but across Africa, because almost all African countries have their version of Utu, right? And the thing that came across was that, it's not a good thing anymore if you brag about it. You should do good things whether somebody is watching or not. It's that integrity. And so I think to get that economic growth and prosperity, you need to also make sure that it's driven from a place of integrity.
Thank you. And I saw some people nodding in the audience as well, so I'll come to you later. I guess in the same vein, right, beyond employment, there are so many challenges that children and families are facing in Tanzania and across the African continent, whether it's, the session earlier, people brought up so many different issues, whether it's, the mental health crisis and lack of resources there, or food scarcity, right? Internally displaced people. There are so many challenges, right? And if you think of things like, I think it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you don't have, if you don't have food, right, and shelter and safety, why should you think about values and Utu, right? What role does Utu play in that? And are we even focusing on the right things? And should Utu even be part of the conversation? I think Sammy, maybe too.
Thank you. That's a very interesting conversation and concept. Thank you. I hope I'm audible enough. I was also listening in on the same conversation, I guess, and when you think about all that is happening around the child, around the environment, the question becomes, what do you prioritize? Do you prioritize delivering food? Do you prioritize all these other things? And when I reflect on that question and think about the work that we're doing, it's really thinking about the child wholesomely. Like I mentioned when I was reflecting on what Utu means to me, it's not just about individual values, but it's really how are we communally, as a community, taking responsibility over the well-being of the child, right? There's people that need to think about food security. There's people that need to think about mental health and all that, just for the wellness of the child. And to my mind, what that means is that, a very old adage, I hope most of us would know this, right? In Africa, we say it takes a village to raise a child, right? And I think what is interesting for me in this sitting is that as civil society, and yesterday we had government, We have Vodafone here. What is that community that we need to build around this child that connects civil society, private sector, and government, so that then we are all taking one part of making sure we're creating an enabling environment, right? And I think about some of the partnerships we've been fortunate enough to have that are enabling us to have these kinds of conversations, right? As content creators, we're focused on the education side of things. We've put together the content, but then we've worked with organizations like Vodafone. We've worked with the Ministry of Health in Tanzania. All this just trying to see how can we all pitch in and sort of make sure that we're building towards the child. And now, if I think about it that way, going again back to what I was saying, it's that shared responsibility that we have around our future president, around this generation that is going to lead Tanzania and the rest of Africa 2050, 2060. How do we work together? That to me is how I can phrase that. A shift of Utu from the individual perspective more to Utu as a shared responsibility that we all have to the society.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, so maybe to add from what San was saying, so for me, I also think of when we think of this baby president, I just think of assuring them that their voice matters since when they are young. So that working collectively, shared responsibility, working with different partners, just to make sure that everyone, like each partner, do in their right part. As for example, what Sam is saying about the Vodafone Foundation and other partners. For example, I can take an example when we worked with under Utu with our season 5 for Ubongo Kids. So we also worked with some partners. And when we think of Utu, we think in like family, I would say family or school settings where family or parents has to install those values to their kids or when they're at school. But we also thought in the perspective of other children who are not in the family settings. For example, for those who are working or living on the streets, the children in the refugee camps, children in the orphanage centers. Yeah, so I also think we also need to considering them as part of this picture of when we picture the future change makers or our baby president. So, yeah.
Okay. So to piggy off of that, to connect what you said, Veronica, and something you said earlier, Cleo, Utu is not a new concept, and it's something that exists in many forms across the continent. We know Ubuntu, for instance, that's the most popular, I think, version of Utu, which also means shared humanity, right? So this is something that has been, in the African value systems for generations and generations and generations yet. However, right, when we think about youth today and their voices, at least from our own research, right, and when you just look at, the news, it's clear that young people are not too satisfied with people in power currently, right, at all leadership levels, right? However, in theory, all of these folks also grew up with Ubuntu, right, and different types of Utu values. So once again, I guess my question is, when we're talking about Utu now, how is it different, right? How does it differ in any way to Ubuntu and the values that have come before us? And also, when we're thinking about our work and the work that other people are doing, how are we ensuring that this is not something that's just taught? Because, most of us were taught these things growing up, but something that's lived and embodied, so that when these future presidents do actually ascend to power and decision making, and it's not just presidents, any people with positions of influence actually embody those values when they get to those roles. And that's for anyone.
I can start.
Right.
Yeah, that's a very dicey question, I feel. right? Because I think we're all familiar with Utu and Ubuntu in some form or fashion, right? So it's not really a new concept. What I would say, I'm thinking about the conversation that just ended on this stage, where the EU was talking about a bit of the work that they're doing, where, you know, they even had the debates with the youth space. And I think, to me, what it speaks to is Utu needs to be lived and practiced, right? It's one thing to say it and amplify that, its values, 1, 2, 3, but it needs to be lived and amplified. I think the example that comes to mind, I think, is something that we have tried as Ubongo, right? Where we're trying to set up what we call Utu clubs, where it's really reinforcing the idea of how do you translate those concepts and ideas into life and practice them. So when I think about how we need to think about the values and forward thinking to the future president, right? Our baby president who's going to be the generation who's going to take leadership in the next couple of years, is really focusing on an environment where this child is able to practice it more. I think about, you know, the video that we watched before the session started, and there's a shift, right? I was listening to a couple of the feedback from the audience, and it was, I would have done nothing. I would have not even been on the road, right? But because of that enabling environment, that I think one of the people in the audience mentioned, that the teacher was there to support that environment and say, no, this is not respect. This is, obedience, and that's different. That environment and enabling those kids to practice that is what I think would enable us really drive that conversation of the change we want to see.
I think I would like to add a little bit of what Sami said now, reflecting on people's responses. Generally, we are the product of our environment, right? So a lot of us, and I related to every one of those responses, like even I probably would have done nothing, kept quiet and keep it moving. But now as a parent, I look at how I talk to my child and how she always, talks back respectfully, because that is very important. How she always talks back, and I'm looking, there's a really big generational gap there. So now, when my mom is around, she might say, wow, you're raising a very tough child. She's talking back. But for me as a parent now, I'm like, but this is how I want her to be, growing up, because how I was raised is like others can do no wrong, right? So I think what needs to happen is for us as a community to come to an agreement with that, and it starts with, like somebody said, it takes a village. It starts by us understanding that for our child or for our kids to actually have a better chance of us prospering in the future and be good leaders, be good presidents, be accountable citizens, we have to raise a culture of Utu. And the culture of Utu comes with, being able to respond respectfully, being able to understand where others are coming from, being able to have empathy, because you have empathetic, or if you get empathetic leaders, then you can build a very empathetic society, which is going to be, a little bit more fair, to everyone within the community. So, yeah, that is one thing I think we should all look at and we should observe as a community.
Yeah, I think something else I would add on that is, when we think of the leaders we want to see, we have to realize that we're building them now. And, in Ireland, we say you can't lick it off a stone. If you expect somebody to have a value or a skill as an adult, as a leader, you have to start building that from childhood, right? And so I remember when we were doing the Utu research, a lot of the kids were telling us that their perception of Utu was that you are generous with money. You lend money when somebody asks you. Because in their homes, that's how they would see, maybe they would ask their mom, why are you giving the money? That's Utu. And so they had this perception that Utu is just a thing about money, generosity. And so when we came back, our discussion then was around, okay, yes, that can be part of it. And we know it's a big part of our society, but also how can we move past kind of a transactional nature of values, right? Because when you follow that through then as they grow older, and we're living in a society where increasingly if you have money, you can buy yourself almost anything. But is that the society we want, you know? So I think with the Utu clubs, something we started exploring was how do you get kids to actually practice these skills? And so, like in the example that Veronica gave earlier of like the kids who were living on the streets, for them, they took part in the Utu clubs, but then after that, they were actually, you know, still going back to their normal day-to-day, going out on the street, trying to get money, trying to get food. But they came back and told us, you know, actually nowadays, we don't fight each other as much. We're still all fighting to try and survive on the streets, but we don't fight each other anymore. Now we actually help each other. If one person manages to get food, we share it with the other one. If we see someone in trouble, we go and help them. And that might seem like a very small thing, but if you actually stop and think about the reality of that you have made that change to no longer fight your peer, but to work with them, collaborate and help, and now keep each other safer, keep each other healthier, keep each other better, you know, that's no small thing. So I think maybe what we think of as Utu is changing and how it will look for kids. I'm sure generations ago, they never would have imagined that a child would be in that situation on the streets of Dar es Salaam saying, that's Utu to me. So I think we need to also think about how do we update our definitions and how do we build that for kids in whatever environment they find themselves in, because that at the end of the day is what's going to lead to, you know, seeing those values in our baby president when they're a grown-up president.
But just maybe on that thread, as we're concluding, commonly there seems to be this, it's a common perception that kind of communal thinking is not always in alignment with innovation, right? And that innovation and growth tends to be you need to be individualistic. You need to be a little bit more, you know, thinking about self-preservation, whether it's at a nation level or at an individual level. But once again, we're here talking about Utu, right? And as it being a critical component of economic growth in this future we want to see. And even tying that back to the research that Taweza shared yesterday, right? Where, you know, within the past, 8 years, the changes in what people valued, you know, it used to be obedience, right? And respect. And now people are valuing creativity, right? So yeah, I guess I'm just curious about what is your take on that? Do you feel like there's a tension between innovation, growth, and Utu, or are there ways that they're actually in conversation?
So this is the part where you say kwamba in Kiswahili kuna jinsi ilivyo na jinsi inavyotakiwa kuwa, right? So I think we've evolved into becoming an individualistic society, right? You know, it's all about survival for the, you know, everybody's fighting for their own survival. So as we keep growing into that, we tend to lose more of what we've had in the past. So these things are like values or Utu. It's more about what's in it for me in relation to what Cleo said. You know, growing up, you know, Utu is about kids. It's more about, you know, if I give money, that means I'm kind. So that means I'm being mtu mwenye utu, you know? But for any society to strive, we need to be able to find the balance, right? Because you have to be in this is why earlier I say we should look at us giving each other opportunities, because that is also a form of utu. Instead of, it's both saying, yes, I'm surviving, yes, I need to survive, but also I need to look after my people. What can I do? That it's not only for me, it's more about what can I do to bring my people along? And then bringing my people along, what value do I add to the society? And that is where the Utu component comes into play. I think lately we've all seen the report that has been shared by the police, right? Where they say there were bodies found in somewhere, I don't know where, but about 8 people that have been murdered by, for lack of a better word, waganga kienyeji or witch doctors. If I reflect it back, at least for me, it's more about had Utu values actually been there, then definitely that wouldn't have happened. So it's more like with the changes that have happened with innovation, with technologies, we focus so much on the processes and the outcomes of it that we've kind of left out the humanity side of it. which is Utu. Now, not saying the witch doctor thing is a new technology or innovation, guys. Please, it's an old technology, but Tanzania tunaijua. But the context here is saying that as we evolve, let's not lose of what has, always held our society together. I mean, for old people who were here when Nyerere was a president, and what he used to preach with is ujamaa, nakujitegemea, and being, for lack of a better, being your brother's keepers, is that essence of Utu that has always been talked about. So let's not lose that for the sake of us advancing with innovation and technology. It's more about the discussion should be, how do we bring that along as we are evolving, as we are growing as a community? And this is where, for most of our content, is always, there's that element of social-emotional learning. There's that element of, we need to speak about Utu, because we know for you to excel, you might excel on the academic sense of things, which is an amazing thing to do, but then that should not come, at the expense of you losing your value or Utu. So they should be able to go together.
Yeah. So also I think we also need to kind of balance between the what we call innovation and like the individual's Utu values and the community thing. So they have also to go along and be like together. So even, for example, what Michael was saying, like the Nyerere era, I feel like we also now need to also keep insisting to go back to that era where like the Utu were kind of, a child was owned by a community, where they would like install those values, be responsible for every child, being responsible for everyone in the society. Yeah.
And I think innovation and Utu can go hand in hand. If you look at like what is driving your innovation, when I think of, the work that we do at Ubongo, we're very much driven by that feeling of, we're not creating for some child out there, even though the majority of our audience are in rural areas, they're living in low-income households, but we always take it back to, is this what we would want our child to watch? And even when we're creating the content, when we're reviewing, we always go back to, okay, but what's good for them has to also be good for us. We can't say that we would, send something out there for other people that we ourselves would not be happy to do and stand over. And I think for us as CSOs, I think if we take that also as our kind of motivation, that it's not, the solutions that we are creating should be things that we ourselves would also feel happy to receive and to stand over. And I think once we keep that in mind, then Utu can actually be a driving factor of innovation.
As Ubongo, there's so much we can do. Ila tukipata pamoja, if we work together, we know where the schools are, we work in these communities, we interact with these kids, we interact with the parents. Kwa hiyo, how can we work together so that we can get to those children? I think is a question I would ask back. And I think as Ubongo, we're always open to seeing how can we build that village around that child, right? How can we build that community? And that community is, who do we partner with and how do we partner with them to make sure that mtoto anapata their content that would help them gain those skills? And is there something you'd like to add?
Yeah. So also to add, for our experience here Tanzania, we also work with the government, and we have started working with Ministry of Health and their behavioral change departments, and we are creating the content like the health segment content. So we are trying, and the government is also trying to change the behavior of the children from the start, because they think that umri wetu tayari wameshatuchelewa. So we discussed with them, when they came up with like amazing topics, which they as a ministry they want the children to learn, and we are creating those content which will be distributed in Tanzania and of course other African countries, but just to try to nurture these children from age 3 or like from when they are young, and waende na hiyo tabia mpaka wakiwa wakubwa.